Very good. I want to welcome everybody to the fourth part of our Back to Basics series. We're talking today about checkbook control for your IRA account. Part one, I actually did a webinar about 3 weeks ago. We talked about self-direction, just 101, going over some of the basics. Part two, we focused on real estate, which we will touch on a little bit today as well. Last week, part three, Larissa Green did a webinar on private lending inside your IRA. So today is kind of the part four, the final part of our Back to Basics series. Now today's event is a simulcast, so I have some people live here at our office in Atlanta, so certainly can ask questions as we go along. If you're listening online, please, if you have any questions, just type them into the question box on your screen. We're monitoring those as well, and we'll get to those as we go along. My name is Scott Maurer. I'm the Director of Business Development for Advanta IRA. I've been with the company for a number of years. I started back at the height of the real estate boom all the way back in 2006 when people were buying and selling a lot of different properties. I came into the company, spent a lot of my time at that point working with individual investors through the transactions and getting accounts set up with us as well. Over the last several years, I really oversee now the business development side of our company, both in our Tampa and Atlanta markets. Of course, we work with people all over the country as well. So a quick disclaimer, some of these slides will be a repeat of some of the back to basics that if everybody's been participating in all four parts. At Advanta, we don't give any legal, tax, or investment advice. So with what we're talking about today, though, we are definitely going to get into some legal issues and sometimes some tax issues as well. And we can wade into those issues, give you information. We just can't make a determination for you from a legal or a tax perspective. So we can certainly refer you to attorneys, CPAs, and those fields that we know who can give you those answers to those questions. Again, we also don't give any investment advice. So people are looking to, should I buy this property? Should I make this investment? Should I lend money to this individual on this particular property? That's not something we do. It's up to you to make sure you do your own due diligence. If anyone's new to the call or in this room as well, wondering who we are, we're a self-directed retirement plan administrator. We'll go into obviously what more self-direction means as we talk today. Been around since 2004. We have over $1 billion in assets under management, with almost getting close to 7,000 active accounts with our account holders. How we try to separate ourselves is in two ways. One, the educational platforms that we offer, the webinars like the one we're doing today, or obviously we're doing a live seminar as well. We try to bring a lot of guest speakers from time to time as well in the industry. It could be someone who does note investing for a living to come talk about their expertise. We've had attorneys come and talk about some legal issues relating to real estate. So we try to bring in a lot of different guest speakers, a lot of different viewpoints as well. So we set ourselves apart with that, as well as our account manager system. Everybody that becomes a client of Advanta's gets paired with one individual in our office who is your account manager, your point of contact, and basically your one-on-one for anything you need regarding your account. I mentioned the Learning Center. Like I said, we do a lot of webinars and seminars. Usually we're probably doing between 4 and maybe 6 or 7 events a month. Some of them live in either our Tampa or Atlanta markets. A lot of them online as well. If you ever miss an event, even if you want to go back and re-listen to the one that we're doing today, we have a YouTube page. So all of the webinars we do are recorded on YouTube. And I had someone here at our live event ask me earlier about whether we've ever done a webinar on land trust. I told him, I said, I honestly can't remember because there's so many events on our YouTube page. But you can go to and look through that library, and you'll see a lot of different content there as well. So really going to talk today, really the key points I think we can take away from today's seminar. We talk about checkbook control, that any IRA or former employer's plan, like a 401k, can qualify to be self-directed and also to then be used in the checkbook structure we're going to talk about. And when you're investing, you're choosing your own investment and also the investment structure. So again, when talking about checkbook control today and talking about using either an LLC, maybe using a trust instead to get checkbook control, you're the one that's in driving that ship and in control of that particular investment. And then when we do have people use checkbook control, it's important to remember that all expenses and income are going to flow in and out of that particular entity. And the IRA owner, very likely, and in the case of an LLC, is going to be the one responsible for funneling that money in and out of that LLC bank account. Again, we'll go into that in a little more detail as we go along. I do want to run through a couple quick slides, kind of, what is self-direction? Really, for those of you, again, new to the call or new to self-direction, it's the ability to hold alternative assets, things that a broker-dealer, a bank is typically not going to hold. We're not going to hold, at Advanta, we don't hold mutual funds, we don't hold stocks, bonds, other things that are publicly traded. What we hold is all the things that kind of fall in between the cracks, real estate, private notes and mortgages, precious metals, the checkbook control structure, obviously, that we're going to talk about today as well. Again, self-directed, this is an important thing that I talk with a lot of people when they're opening up an account. One of the times questions we'll get is, where do I check the box that my account's going to be self-directed on our new account paperwork? And in reality, the word self-directed really refers to what you're going to do with the money once it's in an account. Now, a self-directed account is still a traditional or a Roth or a SEP IRA account. Self-directed just simply means that you're in control of picking what investment you want, as opposed to being limited by what your current custodian is offering. Most IRAs that are out there are with a brokerage firm or a bank that offer limited investment products, and that's why most people haven't heard of self-direction before. So obviously, the people here in the room live today, and a lot of you listening online as well, you've heard about it. That's why you're here. But most people have it because they're not looking for it, and their bank or brokerage firm is certainly not going to advertise to their clients that they can invest in real estate, they can invest in notes, and do different things inside of their IRA. So again, covering the types of plans that can be self-directed, any type of IRA would qualify. You have a traditional or Roth as an individual. Self-employed individuals can open a SEP or a simple IRA account. And also we offer a solo, or we call it an individual K, or basically a solo 401k plan. Some people call it a QRP. That's another plan that's available to you, again, if you are self-employed, if you own your own business. The SEP, the simple, and the 401k offer you the ability to put a lot more money away in a given year. For anyone who's looking to raise capital, it's important to know which of these accounts people could self-direct. If you're talking to other people that you're looking to raise capital from, knowing that any type of IRA, and then also any old 401k, 403b plan, those also qualify to be self-directed. The only accounts that generally you're restricted from using is any current employer's plan. So if you're working for a company now, you have a 401k through them, they can restrict your ability to actually use that money in a self-directed capacity. So the types of assets really that are self-directed are pretty lengthy. And again, we're going to focus today primarily on the checkbook control structure. But the checkbook control IRA and the checkbook control LLC is really just a structure that can be used to hold any one of these investments on this screen. So our clients invest in all types of real estate: commercial, residential, rentals, flips, tax liens, notes and mortgages. People do wholesaling and assignments out of their IRA account. When you get out of the real estate realm, people invest in farm animals, partnerships, a lot of real estate investment funds, private equity funds. All those things can be self-directed. So what a checkbook control structure gives you, when we start talking about that, is actually the ability to still invest in these same assets. But it's having the control where you're writing the check and you're not going back and forth to your administrator to make that happen. So when the IRS created IRAs in 1975, they said simply there's two things that you cannot do inside of an IRA account, two investments you can't make. You can't buy life insurance and you can't buy collectibles. And collectibles would include your antiques, artwork, stamps and coins, things that really don't have that readily apparent value. This is important to remember because even if you set up a checkbook control LLC, you still cannot invest in these types of assets. So the restrictions I'm talking about on this slide, the next few prohibitions, also apply to a checkbook control structure. So if you came to Advanta and says, I want to buy a collectible inside my IRA, we'd say you can't do that, it's against the rules. If you said, oh, in that case, I'll just set up an LLC or a trust, I'll get checkbook control, then I'll invest in those assets. We may not know about it if you do that because you're in control of that checkbook LLC, which we'll go over in a minute, but it's still prohibited. So it's important to remember. I've had that question asked numerous times over the years. What if I just set up an LLC instead to do this? And the reality is we may not know about it as the administrator to therefore prevent you from doing it, but it still would be prohibited. So the other arena where the IRS has limited IRA investments is in the area of disqualified persons. So when you set up your IRA, there's certain disqualified persons who cannot transact with or receive any type of benefit from your IRA account. If it is your IRA, the disqualified persons include both yourself and your spouse, parents and grandparents, basically your lineal ascendants, and also lineal descendants, your children and grandchildren as well. And then any business or entity that is owned or controlled by one of those people. So again, if you have your IRA and you want to buy a piece of real estate that you already own personally, you're prohibited from selling it personally to your IRA. If you set up an IRA LLC to get checkbook control, yes, you may be able to do that in theory because no one knows the rules, but it would still be prohibited. And if you try to do these transactions through Advanta, a lot of times we'll catch these and let you know, hey, you can't do that. That's prohibited. When you do an LLC, obviously you're given a lot more control. So then we'll go over again the pros and cons more towards the end when that comes into being. Another thing, again, to remember about prohibited transactions, I think can happen in a checkbook control structure is if your IRA wants to buy a piece of real estate and you want to use your IRA funds as a down payment, the IRS requires that the loan to your IRA be a non-recourse loan because any of the individuals on this screen are prohibited from lending their personal credit for the benefit of your IRA. So you personally cannot sign on a note or mortgage if your IRA is putting up the down payment. You have to get that non-recourse loan. And again, as I mentioned a couple times already, that same rule extends to you and to your Checkbook LLC if you end up setting that up. So just remember, if you're using a Checkbook LLC and you want to get financing on a piece of real estate, then you need to make sure it's non-recourse loans. I'm happy again, as we go along, anyone in the live audience have questions, please raise your hand. I'm happy to go over that with you. And certainly anyone listening online, make sure you get your questions typed in to the question box as well. All right, so we've kind of been hinting at, I've been talking already what checkbook control is, or at least mentioning it. So we want to highlight the differences really in the basically buying real estate or buying assets using Advanta as the administrator versus what happens when you get a checkbook control. So with a custodial, for purposes of our illustration, I'm going to talk about custodial and administrator accounts versus the checkbook control account. So the custodial administrator account means you're doing all your investments directly through Advanta or directly through your custodian, where your custodian is holding, Advanta in this case, is holding all of your uninvested cash. We're holding title to your assets, and then we're receiving the income and expenses from the account, they're related to that asset, and we're doing that administration. So when you have a tenant send a rent check in, we're receiving and depositing it to the account. Any expenses, you're directing us to pay that out of the account. So you're hands off, you don't have your hands on any of the funds. With the checkbook control account, it allows you to set up a structure by which, either using an LLC or trust, you can put cash into an account where you then will purchase the assets with the cash and be able to initiate those checks, initiate those wires. And then when you're holding those assets as well, you can receive and deposit the rents and the income from that investment into your checkbook control account and pay any direction as well. So you're taking Advanta in that case kind of out of the equation, so to speak. Well, would you have that ability to just directly purchase investments and directly issue checks for expenses, as opposed to having us doing it. So there's a lot of more ease involved, so to speak, with the checkbook control account. Now, we did have a question come online, so I want to make sure we get to that. Yes. Okay. Okay, great question. The first question was, what exactly is checkbook control? And hopefully I've discussed that again here. But again, checkbook control, again, just to reiterate this slide, rather than having your administrator like Advanta issue the checks for your investments, review all your investment paperwork, and do all the administration going forward, checkbook control is using an LLC or a trust, which I'm going to go over here in just a moment, whereby you or someone else has control over all of the cash. And in that case, Advanta actually isn't holding any cash in your account at all. We are simply holding that LLC or that trust, but somebody else is in charge of that particular account. And the question, I think the second question, Renika, was that somebody wants to get a line of credit using an LLC. Yep. So what are the rules getting a line of credit within the LLC that you own? The same as what I just went over for borrowing money. So if you ever want to introduce any kind of line of credit or financing inside of your IRA or inside of an IRA LLC, you have to make sure that your lender is issuing money to your IRA or to your LLC on a non-recourse basis. So even if you own a property free and clear and you want to pull cash out and get some kind of line of credit, it still has to be non-recourse, means that the bank is lending money to your IRA or to your IRA LLC, and that you personally are not guaranteeing the loan. So that being said, a lot of banks don't like doing non-recourse loans. Now, there are a couple of national lenders who will do non-recourse loans to IRAs. One is North American Savings Bank. The other is First Western Federal. So they will do loans to IRAs. They understand the rules involved, but you do want to make sure you get that non-recourse loan that's going to apply to a line of credit or also to financing. And we have another question?
Yes, four questions. First one is, what is the process that you determine the fair market value for the 5498 according to the checkbook control?
Okay, great question. So the question is, how do we determine the value of a checkbook control LLC? So just taking a step back, with IRA accounts, the administrator, such as Advanta, we have to report each year on a form 5498 the value of all of the IRA accounts that we hold. So we do a separate one for each account. We do reach out each year, towards the end of each year, to all of our clients to update us as to the value of the assets you're holding. If it's real estate, you can give us an appraisal, a broker's opinion. Maybe if you want to use Zillow as a evaluation, that's fine. When it comes to the checkbook control structure, we basically want to see almost like a ledger or a detailed list of all of the assets you hold in the LLC and their values, plus any uninvested cash. So in providing that kind of schedule of assets, that would include maybe a copy of a bank statement, that copy of the Zillow printout, the property tax appraiser's number, whatever for the assets, or whatever valuation you've used for those individual assets. So for checkbook LLCs, we do typically will, like I said, receive like a ledger from whoever the manager of that LLC is stating, here's the current value. And then that's what we use in turn to report and update the 5498. And Renika, you said there was one other question? So the question was, can an IRA give a loan? I think the question is, can an IRA loan money to an inherited IRA that is buying the property? Is that correct? Let me see, I might have to pull that up here on my screen to see that one. It's not a little bit convoluted. But essentially, I mean, if your IRA is selling the property to somebody else, you can provide financing to to that party that's buying it, like an owner finance transaction using your IRA. Your IRA can certainly loan money to other third parties. So when we go back to those lists of disqualified persons, if your IRA is lending money, as long as the other party is not a spouse, parent, grandparent, child, or grandchild, or any entity that they control, which would include their IRAs, then that would be allowed. So as long as you're not lending money from your IRA to one of those individuals, you could certainly do that. All right, moving on. So kind of establish what the administrator account is, what the checkbook control account is. And we'll talk now really about kind of the two different strategies that we see when it comes to getting checkbook control. The two different structures we typically see are either somebody using a trust or somebody using an LLC to get checkbook control. And there's definitely some differences between the two, some advantages and disadvantages. Now, when we talk about trusts, most people are familiar with what a trust is. You've seen them in your life as maybe in a revocable trust, as an estate planning device. People set up special needs trust if they have a special needs child or a special situation where they want to leave money in a type of entity where the money is put aside for the benefit of someone else. Regardless of what the trust type is, usually there's three parties involved in a trust. Sometimes some of these are the same people depending on what's going on. But in general, a trust has a grantor, and the grantor is the person or entity that is contributing the assets or cash to the trust. The trust is going to have a trustee, the person or entity who is tasked with overseeing the assets, managing the assets, and acting in a fiduciary capacity. And then also have a beneficiary of the trust, or maybe more than one beneficiary of a trust, depending on how it's set up. And the beneficiary is a person or persons or entities that are ultimately going to receive the assets in the trust overall. So if we talk about a revocable living trust, I think that's a common trust that most people associate, again, are familiar with life estate planning devices. In a revocable trust, you might have a parent who sets up the trust as the grantor and contributes property to it. The parent acts as the trustee during their life, and their beneficiary, their children or grandchildren, when they do pass away. It's a common setup in the estate planning world. When an IRA is involved in setting up a checkbook control and using a trust as the entity to do so, your IRA is the grantor, right? Because the IRA is putting in the cash of the assets into the trust, so it's the grantor. Your IRA is also the beneficiary, because even if you pass away, your IRA is still in existence. So, and ultimately, all of the assets and what's being held in the trust come back into the IRA as the beneficiary. So the IRA is both the grantor and the beneficiary. The trustee, though, does need to be a physical person. Okay, your IRA cannot act as a trustee. It's an inanimate type of entity. And the way we currently work at Advanta IRA, we do not permit, absent an attorney's opinion letter, the IRA owner to be the trustee. So when we talk about checkbook control and getting getting greater control of your funds with a trust, you still would need to have a third party, someone unrelated to you, acting as a trustee. And the reason for that is the trustee of a trust is a fiduciary to your IRA account, and you as an individual can't violate that rule by acting personally as a trustee. Now, I've heard people certainly argue that there's no difference between this and an LLC. For our purposes, there's no case law, at least yet, that supports or confirms, at least, that the IRA owner can be the trustee of a trust. That's why we treat it that way. We'll contrast that here with an LLC, where there actually is case law and case studies. Do we have another question come in online?
What do you mean by third-party bank account?
Okay, somebody asks, what do we mean by third-party bank account? Again, we talk about checkbook control. What that means, if you're not using checkbook control and you're using Advanta as a custodian, we are holding the cash in our trust account for your IRA account. If you set up checkbook control, that allows you to then open up a bank account at whatever bank you choose in the name of your trust or in the name of your LLC, and we move that money into this other account. And then from there, that's where you get the checkbook control.
Next question is, with checkbook control, can I take part of this cash invested in stocks?
Great question. So someone asked, again, for those of you online, if you are using a checkbook control structure and you have extra cash in your account, can I use that to invest in stocks and bonds and mutual funds? The answer is yes. We've had many clients do this with their checkbook control. It's just a matter of if you want to, if you set up your LLC or you set up your trust, you invest in real estate, but you have a good chunk of cash sitting there, you can, in theory, open up a brokerage account with whatever firm you wish in the name of your trust or in the name of the LLC that you've set up for checkbook control and move money into those assets. We certainly have seen people do that within their checkbook control structure. Yep, a question live here.
Do you have the tax ID for the LLC?
Great question. So when we talk about checkbook control LLCs or trusts, do I need a separate tax ID number? Yes, and the reason being for either the trust or for the LLC, in order to get checkbook control means you need to get a bank account open for that particular entity, that particular trust, that particular LLC. And if you go to a bank, they need to associate a tax ID number to whatever account they open, and you do not want to associate that bank account to your personal social. So in that case, yes, you do need to get an EIN number or tax ID number for the trust or for the LLC for the purposes of opening up that particular bank account. All right, so we talked about trust. The other, I would say, probably much more common way that we see people get checkbook control is by using an LLC. So just to go over some of the terminology involved with an LLC, an LLC, the owners or the shareholders are typically referred to as members. Okay, so a member of an LLC is someone who actually has ownership in that particular entity. So again, people also familiar with corporations. Corporations have shareholders. LLCs have members. Corporations have presidents and vice presidents. With LLCs, you have a manager, and the manager is the one who is in charge of the entity. And the other type of terminology, the other term I want to introduce, or at least refamiliarize some people with, is an operating agreement. So with a corporation, you have bylaws that exist on how the corporation is going to be run. With an LLC, you have an operating agreement that shows how the LLC is going to be run, but more importantly, the LLC is also going to list who the members of that entity are, and what their ownership percentages are, and how much they've contributed. So corporations issue stock, and so if you want to determine or designate that you have ownership in a corporation, you'd have a stock certificate issued to your IRA. LLCs don't have stock, so instead, LLCs have operating agreements where you can list who all of the different owners are, again, quote, shareholders of that entity. That's important for our purposes because at Advanta, whenever we purchase an asset, we have to designate and have proof of what does your IRA actually own, whether it's a deed to a property, or in this case with an LLC, we need to see the operating agreement that shows your IRA listed as a member. Now with LLCs, the IRA itself cannot be a manager or managing member. Again, same thing we were talking about with a trust and an IRA not being a trustee. Again, an IRA is an inanimate entity. So it can't act in that capacity to make decisions on behalf of the LLC. However, the IRA owner, like I said, there is case law to support for you as the IRA owner to be the manager of the LLC. That's one important distinction between the LLC and the trust. Again, with the trust, there's no case law to support you as the IRA owner acting as trustee. But with the LLC situation, there are a couple of cases now where the tax court has ruled that it is acceptable for you as the IRA owner to be the manager. Now, you cannot receive any compensation. You can't pay yourself to be that capacity, but you can act as the manager. We have another question came in online.
Yes, in your opinion, would an S Corp suffice for an LLC?
Great question. So the question online is, would an S corporation suffice for an LLC? Now, S corporation and LLC are two different legal entities. Okay, there's corporations which can be taxed as either a C corporation like Coca-Cola and IBM, all the big companies are, or for smaller companies, they're an S corporation. Well, S corporation is also a tax status. So you can set up an LLC that is taxed as an S corporation. Now, when an IRA is involved, you cannot have an S corporation or an S corporation tax status. And the reason is not an IRA rule, it's an S Corp rule. So kind of getting off topic a little bit, if you're setting up an S corporation, one of the requirements is all shareholders of an S corporation have to be individuals, and your IRA is not an individual. So your IRA cannot invest into an S Corp. Another question?
What status should the IRA be?
So good, great question. So that came in live. What status would the LLC have? So if you're doing checkbook control where it's just your IRA and the LLC, there's only one member, your IRA, typically the tax status is the LLC is a disregarded entity for tax purposes. And what that means is all of the tax ramifications for the LLC flow through the LLC to the member, which in this case is your IRA. Your IRA doesn't pay taxes for the large majority of the count. So disregarded entity for an LLC if it's only one member. If your IRA is involved in an LLC where there's more than one member, generally speaking, it's then taxed as a partnership. Yes, a question came in online.
Yes, besides general business record keeping like income, expenses, profit and loss, are there any specific IRA record keeping that's required on a monthly or yearly basis?
So the question was, rather than keeping track of income and expenses in and out of the IRA or in and out of the LLC, what other requirements are on a yearly basis for your IRA? Reality is, for your IRA account, the only thing the IRS requires is that your custodian, which would be Advanta, we report distributions to you personally, we report contributions that you've made, and we report an annual value of your account. So we just report a dollar amount a figure at the end of the year as the total value of the account. The IRS does not require to have a full record of all the money in and all the money out of your account. That being said, if the IRS ever audits your IRA account, you'd want to have a clear record of the money in and the money out of your accounts. That's what we do with the administrator and custodial accounts. We keep those records. If you're doing a checkbook control structure, you're going to want to keep similar records as well, because we won't have the record of the money going in and out of your LLC or your in and out of your trust account, because we don't have access to that statement. But you would want to make sure you keep good records for that, just again, in case the IRS were to ever audit the account. All right, so we're going to go through a couple case studies here, illustrate both trust and the LLC, how they work, and hopefully flesh out some other issues as well. We're going to take Joe, who's looking to invest in real estate. Again, we center this on real estate mainly because that's what a lot of people set up the checkbook control structure for. However, again, you can, using a checkbook control structure, you can invest in any of those assets that we talked about in that earlier slide, and even the stocks and bonds we had the question about as well. So case study, Joe has money in a traditional IRA account, wants to invest in different real estate assets, going to be rental properties, rehabs, not really for sure exactly maybe what it's going to be at this point, but he'll have some money going in and money going out of the account. So how does this process work? I think best way to highlight how checkbook control structures work is to show you how it works all as well on the administrator side, so we can contrast that. So if Advanta is acting as the record keeper and administrator, we're doing that administrator custodial account. Again, the case study starts, Joe is opening up and funding his account with Advanta, transferring money, rolling it over from an existing IRA or 401k. We help him get that all set up. But when Joe identifies a property he wants to purchase, he's going to contact us and say, I want to buy 123 Main Street. And we will work with Joe and say, okay, well, if you're buying this property, here's the wording to use for your IRA as the buyer, Advanta IRA for the benefit of Joe's IRA and his account number. So we will actually sign off on the contract. We will then start working with the title company or the attorney that is handling the closing to make sure that the settlement statement, the deed, all show his IRA account as the buyer. So we will have initially issued the escrow deposit, the earnest money deposit out of his IRA. And when it comes time to closing, we will issue all the funds from his IRA to actually pay it. So, and again, in this particular scenario, we are working with Joe. We're going to end up holding title of the asset and reviewing all the closing documents as well. So we're making sure they're titled properly, make sure Joe approves of them, and then ultimately we complete the closing. Now going forward, Joe is still finding the tenants, deciding what work needs to be done on the property, how much he's going to charge in rent, etc. But all of the activity, all that cash money going in and out is going to flow back through his IRA with us at Advanta. So his tenants will send a rent check to our office, we'll deposit it to his account. When he has an expense, he can use our online portal, he can fax in a bill. We will cut the check out of his account. So if he needs a payment for a contractor, he's going to have to, basically ask us to cut a check, cut a wire to get it sent to his contractor. He cannot just directly issue that himself. He'll be able to track all of his activity online. We send out email notifications for the money's coming in and going out of the account. He'll be able to track it, but he can't actually issue the checks out himself and handle the funds. And certainly he can hold this property indefinitely. We'll continue to act as the administrator. So we would hold both the property in his account and also all of the uninvested cash that's been accruing from his rents. Another question?
Yeah, so an online reference that they attempted to open up the LLC, checkbook LLC with the bank, and the bank wanted $100 in front to establish the account. Should they pay that, or how should they run the account?
All right, so the question online came in about if you're setting up an LLC bank account and the bank says we need an initial deposit, do I just put up that $100 personally, or to come from the IRA? Best case scenario is you will fund that directly from the IRA first, and I'll revisit that question here in just a moment. So, yes, question.
What's kind of the timeline respected to these things as you go back and forth with the event?
All right, so great question. So if we're acting as the administrator, the question here at our live event is what is the time frame for us issuing checks, receiving income, et cetera. So if we get all the mail, we typically get mail in our office at noon at 2 o'clock. So the checks are posted usually the following day for the tenant sending your rent check. for getting expenses paid out. If you get us that bill or you submit it online by noon, we will get that check cut the same day and mailed. But our main office is in Tampa, so the checks do originate from there, depending on, obviously, people here live or in Atlanta, the check's got to come up here. For other clients outside of both Tampa and Atlanta, it's gonna need to get to you there. That's going to be important. That's a great question to really illustrate then why people use the checkbook control when you need payments more quickly. I mean, processing payments the same day is probably the fastest and best at it in the industry. But sometimes, depending on who you're working with, you may still want it a little faster. All right, so that example was Joe buying the real estate using us as the administrator, using Advanta to process the initial purchase and process all the investment record keeping as well. So now we're going to show you how to use an LLC to do it. So the first part of the equation is still the same. Joe sets up his an account, funds it with his rollover, transfer, gets the account open. The difference though for Joe when he's using a checkbook LLC is that his next step in the process is not to give us a contract and start working on the closing. The next step for him would then be to form the actual LLC that he wants to use his checkbook control for. So it'd be up to Joe to choose the state he wants to set up the LLC. There are different states with different laws, and that's again where we don't get into the realm of telling you which state you should open up the LLC in. I will say most states, I think it doesn't matter if you, for instance, have a Delaware LLC, but you're buying property in Georgia or Florida. I don't think it matters for holding real estate. But you can choose whatever state you want to set up the LLC. Choose the name for your LLC. Would be a good quick piece of advice. Don't include your IRA name in the name of the LLC. I've had some people do that over the years. You can use whatever name you want. When you know the requirements for each state, the name can be anything you choose for it. Some people use legal or tax services to help them get the LLC set up and file the articles. And the articles, as opposed to the operating agreement, which we talked about earlier, the articles of organization for an LLC is a document that you file with the state to name who the manager of the LLC is, and the name of the LLC, and the address. Okay, on the articles of the LLC that you file, you are not required to name who the member of that LLC is, and therefore you do not list your IRA account on the articles of organization. Instead, we will ask you for that operating agreement that I talked about earlier, and that's the document in which you will list your IRA as the member. The operating agreement is not filed with the state. That is a private document. In some states, you're not even required to have one. Of course, we require one because we need to see the ownership of your IRA, but the operating agreement is not publicly filed. But the operating agreement is going to be where we're looking for that same language from the last case study with the Advanta IRA, FBO Joe's IRA, and his account number. Again, that's going to be the document that proves that Joe's IRA is an owner or a member of that particular LLC. Yes, question?
Yes, so if you wanted to invest in maybe 2, 3, 4 properties, are you gonna have one IRA checkbook control, or will this be, if it's 3 properties, is it 3 checkbook control IRA?
Good, great question from the live audiences. If I were looking to use and buy maybe 2 or 3 different properties or more, do I need to set up 2 or 3 LLCs, or can I do it all in one? That's going to be, the answer is that's completely up to you. So we've had many clients who have used one LLC to buy multiple properties and simply have one checkbook. You have others who have talked to an attorney, and the attorneys or other people have recommended setting up an LLC for each different property. That is a personal decision, but you certainly can hold all properties inside the same LLC. We had another question came in online.
Question is, Joe also has an option to manage the account himself, so he wants to know if Joe has the option to manage the account himself.
So I'm not quite sure what that question's asking as far as Joe being able to manage the account. He can certainly manage his IRA account with us and telling us what to do as far as the property goes, what bills to pay, what contractors to hire. If we're acting as a custodian and the administrator of that property, he just has to ask us for the checks and ask us for the money going in and out of the account. Now with the LLC, he is the manager. He definitely has the control still to select his tenants, select his contractors. Just in this case, as we'll see in this next slide, now that he has set up this LLC, we are going to sign the operating agreement on behalf of his IRA, basically to confirm that Joe's IRA is the member. And we will then send money from the IRA to fund that LLC. We can send it by check or wire. Getting back to that question that came online, when you go to open up a bank account in the name of the LLC, I would say best case scenario is you wait to open up that bank account until we can hand you a check that you can take to use as your initial deposit of that LLC. Now, if you do it where you go to the bank and they ask you to put up $100, again, that's not the best case scenario. You just want to make sure at some point you take that $100 back out because that is your personal money in there. So once you get your IRA funds, at a minimum, take your $100 back out. Again, better case scenario is have the IRA simply fund it directly. So again, so Advanta, we've signed Joe's operating agreement. He has a tax ID number. He gets the bank account open and is able to deposit the funds from his IRA into his LLC. Now when Joe is ready to buy his real estate, we're going to be out of the picture. Okay, so from Advanta's perspective, once we have funded the LLC, we're done. I mean, his IRA is holding the LLC, but he as manager can now enter into contract to buy real estate in the name of the LLC itself. He signs the documents as the manager of the LLC, and going forward, again, he's still controlling his tenants, still controlling all the maintenance and whatnot, but the rents from his tenants, they send him directly to Joe. He deposits it in the LLC bank account. Any expenses, those same taxes and maintenance items, etc., he just pays those out of the LLC bank account. And if there's any other cash in the LLC, obviously he can use that to reinvest in CDs, other brokerage accounts, and things that we covered as well. So this is what it really truly means when we talk about checkbook control, is Joe has the ability to actually write those checks. He has a checking account for this LLC. He may even have a debit card he can use to buy supplies at Home Depot or Lowe's. He has a check to pay his contractors right there on the spot. Again, that's the advantage of the Checkbook Control LLC. Yes, question.
Yes, are you allowed to make a loan against the checkbook IRA?
So the question is, can you make a loan against the Checkbook LLC? Is that to take a personal loan, or was it be to loan to other parties?
Well, let's say that you're doing some rehabbing and, you just want to be able to make payments real quickly, without having to wait or just be expeditious. Are you allowed to make a loan against your self-directed IRA and then, of course, make the payments back to the checkbook?
So I understand correctly what you're saying is if you have the Checkbook IRA LLC, but you come across and you just pay for something personally, can you do that and have the LLC later pay you back? Or I guess that's what I'm trying to.
No, they would be reimbursing me in that situation, but it's $1,000. We're just not talking about a lot of money. But, there's this opportunity, and it's $1,000, and they're going to give you the supplies that you need.
Right.
Maybe they on sale, they wholesale. So this will be the opportunity. The sale is not going to, whatever. Can I make that payment and make that loan against my IRA so that I'm getting the money back?
And so the question is, for those of you listening online, was kind of if you come across a situation where someone's looking to give you, I guess, deals on the supplies, or
any number of services.
Okay.
Maybe you want to put a down payment on another property.
So the situation is if there's any kind of lending involved.
Any kind of lending, I'll take it from that.
Yeah, so any kind of lending involved if you're using the Checkbook LLC, again, has to be non-recourse. And what it would mean is basically you can certainly have your LLC pay back a loan, but it just can't be a loan to you personally, if that makes sense. So if you're using a checkbook control or using the IRA, any type of loan has to be that structure. It can't be a loan that you're signing on that you're paying back personally. Either the IRA or your LLC needs to pay that back. Another question come in online. Yeah, great question. The question was, can you take distributions after you each 70.5 of the checkbook control? I'll cover that at the very end. That's one of the last slides of the presentation, so we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay, one of the other ones, what are the advantages for an LLC?
So the advantages of opening up LLC, one thing I'll touch on quickly here that opposed to the trust. So the advantage of the LLC we've at least talked about from this standpoint is having that checkbook control. With an LLC, you're allowed to be the manager as opposed to a trust. So we'll talk about checkbook control of the trust here in just a few slides. The LLC, though, you do have to file publicly with the state. So it's not as anonymous as doing a private trust might be. That's one of the, I guess, disadvantages. And the LLC does have a filing fee on a yearly basis. But the advantages of really for the checkbook structure, at least how we operate, is that you as the IRA owner can be the manager because there is the case law to support that. Yep. Another question from online?
Yeah, so if you use more than one LLC to own real estate, you can have, can you have one LLC own the others? For instance, if your IRA owns a holding company, and in turn, there's multiple LLCs within that.
Great question. So the question online that came in is essentially, can I create kind of almost like a master LLC that your IRA owns, and then create a series of other LLCs underneath that all own the individual properties? The answer is yes. I mean, that's again, we get into the different legal structures of trusts and LLCs and how you structure it. I've seen people use a combination of trusts and LLCs for the same investment. That's more of a legal determination that you and your attorneys would make, but it's certainly those types of strategies are available to you with your IRA account. So yes, you could certainly basically, I guess they call them series LLCs to an extent. You set up one big one for your IRA to invest in. That's what we hold at Advanta, and then from there, that LLC might create other structures for each property. All right, so when we talk about checkbook control using an LLC, it must be manager managed, because your IRA, you is personally acting as a manager, but you're not a member. We have seen, obviously, we're talking checkbook control structure, and in this the case study we went over, it was specifically one IRA involved, and that was it. But it is possible to have more than one party involved in that particular LLC. We've seen husband and wives both put their IRAs together in the same LLC. We've seen, say, 3 or 4 individuals using some IRA, some personal money, be involved in that same LLC. It's just important when you do that, that the ownership percentages that are outlined in the operating agreement are based on each party's contribution. So if your IRA is putting in 25% of the total capital to an LLC, then your IRA needs to be reflected as a 25% owner. It can get a little complicated if you start using more than one owners, and you might have other people who are disqualified that are partnering in that LLC with you. It might be hard to change percentages later or add additional funds later. That's kind of a personal situation. Most of the checkbook LLC structures that we see at Advanta are one IRA and one LLC. That doesn't become an issue. Again, if it's a single member issue, or single member entity, I should say, we talked about this, it's a disregarded entity for tax purposes, there should not be any tax return then required. Now, if you do have your IRA and a few other people in the same LLC, now you're a partnership for tax purposes. In that case, the LLC does have to file a partnership tax return. So that's something just to keep in mind. Your IRA may not owe any taxes, but that return still needs to be filed. For those people listening in Florida, single member LLCs don't have liability protection in Florida. It's very dubious whether or not how much protection they really have. That's just something to be aware of. The Swanson v. Commissioner and the tax court memo regarding Ellis are the 2 main cases that went before the tax court, where the tax court said it is okay for the IRA owner to be the manager of that LLC. If we go all the way back to we talked about disqualified persons, I said any entity that is owned or controlled by somebody who's disqualified would be prohibited, right? So if you're controlling an LLC, how can your IRA invest into it? Maybe splitting hairs, but these 2 tax court decisions said if you're starting a brand new LLC, nobody owns that entity. So when your IRA first invests into it, how could that be a prohibited transaction? So that's what that case of Swanson v. Commissioner and the tax court case of Ellis said. Basically, you're allowed to be the manager as long as it's kind of from inception. But if you set up an LLC 3 years ago, and currently that LLC, quote, is empty, but you owned it personally 3 years ago, you cannot now use that LLC for your IRA account because that LLC has already been in existence for a while. So if you're setting up checkbook control with your LLC, you do need to create a new entity.
As of what year?
As of what year? I would say typically you want to make sure it's probably within the last 30 to 60 days at the worst. I think best case scenario again is that you have the IRA set up first and then the LLC. So the timeline would show your IRA was established first and then the LLC. Not mandatory, but that'd be best case. When you start getting into it's been 3 or 4 or 5 months, even if you haven't quote used the LLC, still in a sense owned by you, even if it doesn't have anything inside. Now, Renika, do we have another question online?
Yes, I was asking how to obtain the EIN number or how to fill out the form. Yes.
Great question. So the question is, how do I, when you go to get a tax ID number for an LLC or any entity, the IRS has a format. You go online to their website. You can get an online SS4, and the question online is, how do you do that? How do you file that? Well, you go in and you create the LLC, or tell them you want a tax ID number for an LLC. You're going to end up using your name and your social. Honestly, that's the unfortunately the way you have to do it. That's where people do get confused, because the IRS, whenever they issue a tax ID number to any type of entity, need to tie it to an existing tax ID number, whether it's your social or some other entity. So if you're filing the SS4 online to get that tax ID number, use your name as the manager and use your social. You can always send a note to the IRS that you were merely acting as the manager and you have no ownership. That's a little letter I have formatted. If you have somebody who ever wants to borrow that, I'm happy. That's something I'm happy to provide that you can provide to the IRS. All right, so last part of the case study I want to show here to illustrate using a trust for checkbook control. Again, same, Joe's starting out, same scenario, completing the application, rolling over funds. Again, now with a trust, you don't have to set up a trust through the state, right? You don't have to register a private trust document with the state, but you do need to have the trust agreement drafted. So instead of getting an operating agreement for an LLC, we want to see the actual private trust document that lists, again, Advanta IRA for benefit of Joe's IRA, both as the grantor and again also as the beneficiary. Again, because his IRA is putting the money in, and at the end of the day when the trust is closed, his IRA needs to receive all the funds and assets back out. Again, because there is not case law like there is with the LLC, we do require that Joe choose a non-disqualified person to act as the trustee. Okay. Joe will review and approve the trust. He'll have his trustee sign the document, and then we will sign on behalf of the IRA account. His trustee is going to need to go get a tax ID number, again, to get a bank account for that trust for the IRA funds to be then deposited into. Again, he can create the name of he can name the trust whatever he wishes, choose his trustee. Now that the money's in the account, whenever Joe needs to make an investment, pay a bill, he'll just have to work through his trustee to not only buy the asset, but also then make those payments and receive all that income in and out of the trust. So it's a different way, even though we call it checkbook control, because it's still taking that daily paying of bills and receiving income out of our hands as a custodian and placing them in, basically a bank account. Well, in this case with the trust, again, one of the big differences between this and an LLC is that Joe would have to choose a third party to act as trustee. So if he needs a check for an investment or to pay a bill, he's going to have to go to his trustee and request that they sign that check. Yes, another question, Renika?
Yes, so besides a check from Advanta to fund the account, are there any other ways that they can add money to that check?
So the question was, how can I add other monies besides a check? We can wire money to a bank account. We can send monies through ACH. When we're purchasing any investment, the 3 ways, we can either send a check, an electronic ACH, or a wire transfer. That goes for real estate closings all the way through the checkbook control structures. Yes, question here live. Yeah, so if you're looking to send money from your IRA to any investment or into the checkbook structure, we can either do it we can send money via check from your IRA, electronic ACH, or by wire. All right, one of the questions that came up a minute ago was came online was taking money out of the account. So I want to take a distribution either for an RMD, required minimum distribution, or just because you want a distribution. It's important to note that when the money's in your checkbook control structure, although it would be very easy for you to simply write yourself a check and deposit in your own account, you do need to send that money back to Advanta, back into your IRA, and then have us issue the check or the ACH or wire back to you as a distribution. The reason for that is that we report to the IRS all distributions from your account. Again, we had told that at the beginning, that's one of the reporting requirements that we do. If you take that money out personally from the LLC, the IRS is not going to even know that you took that distribution. If they were to find out, at best they might say, shame on you, don't do it again, you owe us this amount of taxes and penalties. The worst case scenario is they would say, that was prohibited for your IRA trust or your IRA LLC to simply pay you and do that. That should have gone back to the custodian. Now you've done something that's prohibited. Now you've basically invalidated your entire IRA account and what was involved, and your whole IRA then is taxable and subject to penalties as opposed to just the amount of the distribution. So even though it might seem like a hassle when you can just simply move money from one account to the other, you do need to send it back to us and have us turn around and send it to you so that the proper reporting happens. All right, so again, I kind of illustrated the pros, the administrator, custodian versus the checkbook. Kind of what are the pros and cons? I hopefully illustrated a lot of these during the presentation, but just to reiterate, if you're using the IRA administrator, you're having everything go through Advanta, one of the pros is that you're keeping an arm's length from the funds, so you don't have that direct control where you might do something prohibited. I just mentioned if you were to take a distribution out personally, that could be looked at as prohibited. If you are using Advanta as your administrator, you're going to have to ask us to issue that distribution. If you have that money in your LLC bank account and you want to make a loan from your IRA to your daughter because she needs some money to buy her next house, very easy to simply do that through your LLC or your trust. If you do that through Advanta, we're going to say, wait a second, your daughter is prohibited and you can't do that at all, and we would catch that transaction. So you're less likely to engage in something that's prohibited going through Advanta. It's an extra set of eyes on that, as well as we then provide you that clear record of all activity. Again, the IRS doesn't require it, but if they ever were to audit your IRA, you want to be able to show where all the money goes in and out of the account. That's what we have by doing the record keeping. Now the cons, if you're buying 2, 3, 4, 5 different assets through Advanta, we have different fees. Obviously, each time we're involved in buying an asset and doing the record keeping for that on an annual basis. So there's a potential for more administrative fees to hold more assets. And you don't have the ability to write checks for an immediate purchase. If you're buying at an auction, you're dealing with a contractor, you want to check on the spot. Again, obviously, you're going to have to get that from us in advance. So I guess, again, the kind of the downside is the speed at which you could get money with the checkbook control may not be there with the administrator, but at least we're holding on the funds, hopefully keeping out of trouble that you could get into. Now, obviously, using checkbook control, the pros are, hey, I got quick access to the money that I need for an auction purchase. I can hold all of the assets in my account. If I want to buy and be a wheeler and dealer in real estate and doing notes, I can do all of this in one checkbook structure with one fee that I pay on an annual basis to Advanta. And there could be some asset protection and anonymity involved when you're investing through a trust or through an LLC. I will say if you're concerned primarily with just anonymity, because I showed in that example when Joe's buying the property through Advanta that the title is Advanta IRA for benefit of Joe Smith IRA and his account number. So if you're Joe Smith, we've had many clients over the years say, I don't want my name anywhere on public record. If that's the case, and that's your only concern, we can title property simply as Advanta IRA for benefit of account number and just use your account number. So if that's your only concern, you do not need to set up checkbook control just to not have your name appear on public record. We can certainly work with you on that. Cons, again, you're responsible now for keeping those accurate records. Again, if the IRS were to ever audit your account, you are responsible for showing all the money in and out of the account. Not as much oversight from us as the administrator. So it's easier to do something that's prohibited. I'll add one other con here as well, is that if you're looking to set up an LLC, you're going to have to pay a fee possibly to get it set up with the state. If you're using an attorney or a CPA, we can refer people to you that can help you do that, but they're going to cost at least a couple $100s, if not more, to get that set up, as well as ongoing annual reports that you don't have that same expense if you're using Advanta as a custodian. So just a couple things to think about, kind of weighing the pros and cons. One thing I will mention, I don't think it's in one of the slides, if you said, all right, I want to have Advanta buy the property as a custodian, and I'll have Advanta hold all the cash. What about if 2 years down the road I decide, you know what, I want to actually put this all into an LLC and do it myself? Can I do that? And the answer is yes, you can. We can sign a deed down the road to transfer that property into an LLC and also send all of your cash into that structure as well. And conversely, if you start off with a checkbook control LLC, because you're going to be buying several different properties and find out that at the end of the day you really only own one and there's no need to have an LLC, you can also get rid of the checkbook control and have Advanta just hold it as a custodian and administrator. So it's not, you have to choose up front and you're locked in for life which way you go. You can always switch at a later date. So kind of whether you use trust or an LLC, talk with an attorney, talk with CPAs. Again, we can refer those individuals to you. A lot of people do, despite the allure of a checkbook control, a lot of people do sometimes just elect to have us do the record keeping and not involve, again, filing fees for LLCs or finding a third party to act as trustee. Again, I mentioned it's possible to switch between strategies later, but we do not and cannot provide you a strategy or counsel really to which strategy you should use. Now, sometimes it definitely might make things easier if you're buying properties at auctions to have the checkbook control structure or doing a lot of different deals, but we can also process things without that. It's just you might have more fees involved for what you're doing. So I'm going to wrap up some of the presentation here, but I know we have some more questions online. I might have some more here live that we'll want to get to, but we make getting started very easy. You can go to our website and get started there. You can certainly reach out to us. My contact information, I think was on one of the earlier slides. You can always get the recording back as well. For those of you live, we'll give you Renika's cards to reach out to her or me as well. But we do make the process easy, setting up the account, getting it funded, and ultimately investing. I've said this many times in many presentations. A lot of our clients come to us at step 3. They've already found the investment. They've identified the property. They've identified the private real estate fund they want to invest in. They just come back to us to do it using your IRA. So it's important, no matter what you're investing in, to realize your IRA very well could be used to make that investment. So at this point, I'll open up. I know Rika said we had some more questions, so I want to go over and hit those.
Okay, so for rental real estate and the checkbook policy, things like the utility bills, taxes, insurance, are they held in the name of the LLC or is it in the IRA?
Great. So great question that came in online is if you are buying property and real estate through the LLC and you have utilities and setting up other accounts, yes, the question is, do you put those in the name of the LLC? And the answer is yes. So if you're buying a property at 123 Main Street and you're turning on the utilities, you can turn those on in the name of the LLC so that all those bills get sent directly to your LLC to be paid. Do we have some other questions?
Yeah, so another question is, I have an existing LLC that I'm looking to move funds from another IRA to Advanta. Did I hear you correctly in terms of that I need to set up another LLC for that transaction?
Can you repeat? I'm sorry, one more time. I was looking here, I'm trying to look at some of the questions here online too.
Okay, so he referenced that he has an existing LLC that he's looking to move funds from an IRA to Advanta.
Yep.
Does he need to set up another LLC for that?
Yes. Yep. I saw a question. If you already have an existing LLC and it's been more than 30 days or 60 days since that LLC was created, you do need to set up a separate LLC for your IRA. I understand that can be frustrating at times, but again, you already set that entity up, especially if it's been a few years. You've owned that LLC personally. If your IRA to come in now, essentially your IRA is buying the ownership from you, and that becomes prohibited. That's where you as a disqualified person cannot sell the LLC to your IRA account. And let's see, I have other questions as well. Several years ago, back in the bubble, I lost due to foreclosure a couple of single-family homes owned by my IRA. I was unable to deduct or report the loss on my income tax. There was no trust or LLC. Would I agree with that? So basically, any losses that happen within an IRA account, you cannot take any deductions for on a personal basis because your IRA is the owner of that property, not you personally. You can only deduct your personal losses, and a loss to your IRA is not a loss realized by you as an individual. So the upside of that is the gains inside of an IRA account don't go on your personal tax return, but the losses you cannot deduct as well. Let's see, we have one more question came in. It says, why you would want an LLC or trust not work under your name? I don't quite understand that question. But at this point, I know we're a little over the hour. Does anyone live here have any additional questions for us? Yeah, Will.
Yes, can you as an individual partner with your LLC to buy some property? You don't have all the cash. The LLC, the LLC doesn't have all the cash. Can you?
Yep, great question. So the question is, if I have a checkbook LLC with my IRA, but there's not enough cash to buy the next investment, can I also use personal money? And the answer is you can, as long as you buy the property from the outset as a partnership between your IRA LLC and you personally. And it needs to be indicated on all of the closing documents what percentage your IRA LLC owns and what percentage you own personally. So that's an important distinction. I didn't really talk about that much in this presentation. It was probably covered in one of the previous weeks that we did. It is possible with disqualified persons for your IRA to partner on an upcoming transaction. So if you don't own the property yet, your IRA and a disqualified person can potentially be used together to buy that property from the third party seller, basically in that situation. However, once you have bought a property personally, or you have bought a property in your IRA, you cannot later sell a portion to that other part, due to yourself or disqualified person. So it's all a matter of timing when you talk about partnering. So when you're partnering, it's your IRA and either you or a disqualified person, both as a buyer buying from a seller, that's permitted. If it's a situation where your IRA is selling a portion of a property to you, now it's a situation where your IRA is a buyer, you are the seller, that's an improper transaction. So I hope that was clear to answer the question. Okay.
I guess second point.
All right, another question follow-up. Sure.
So if you're renting the property out, the percentage have been established, and you're renting the property out, the check that comes from the tenant, they have to give you 2 or more checks?
Yep.
Based upon the percentage?
Yep. So the question is, if you do partner, your IRA owns a percentage and you personally own a percentage,
Yes.
And your tenant sends a check, yes, they need to send 1 check to your IRA and 1 check to you personally. Yeah, you can't commingle your personal money into your IRA or your IRA LLC.
They could send 1 check and then separate it by the percentage. They literally have to send 2 checks.
So in the situation where your IRA is a partner and you personally are a partner, you do need to have the tenant send 2 checks.
Yeah.
Because if they send the whole check to us, we cannot deposit your personal portion into your account, even if we issue a check back out. And if they send the full check to you, you cannot then personally send us the difference. So you would need to have them send 2 checks, or getting back to the checkbook control, we've seen people who want to use part IRA, part personal money, set up an LLC where both your IRA is an owner, you personally are as an owner of that LLC, and then your tenants can send 1 check to the LLC, and you can write 1 check out to pay for bills, because at the end of the day, that LLC is owned on a percentage basis. So that's one way to get around it, is simply using an LLC that is owned by both your IRA and by you personally. And I can go over that. I can go over that in more detail if you need some more clarification. So at this point, I'm going to conclude. I'm going to end the web portion of the simulcast. I appreciate everybody for logging in today and listening. Obviously, for those of you live, I'll be around to continue to answer questions. So thanks again for listening. If you're listening online, we look forward to talking with you.